The scent was faint at first, metallic, musty, almost like rusted copper soaked in damp earth. Margaret Green caught a whiff of it when she passed the basement door, balancing a laundry basket on her hip. She paused, frowned, and sniffed again. Nothing. The old house groaned quietly as it always did. It had stood strong for over 50 years. She and her late husband had raised their children here, filled its rooms with lullabies, birthday parties, exam stress, and Sunday dinners. After James died, the children stayed, promising to care for her, keep her company. She was grateful, even if Daniel rarely came out of his room, and Alina spent most of her time on her phone or whispering in the backyard. She never questioned it. They were good kids, quiet maybe, but they had good hearts, at least she believed they did. But the smell returned, stronger. Day by day, it crept through the vents, curled around her legs while she cooked, lingered in her nostrils when she tried to sleep. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the smell. Margaret started noticing other things. The basement door, always locked now, even though it had never been locked before. The muffled noises at night, like dragging or shifting. Her tools were moved from the shelf, and Daniel's clothes, they were stained with something reddish, brown. Rust, he said. She wanted to believe him. Then came the leak. It started with a gurgling in the kitchen sink, then a strange wet spot on the hallway carpet. When she finally found a trail of water snaking along the baseboards, she called the plumber. His name was Todd McKay, a friendly, middle-aged man with a stained blue cap and a thick laugh. Margaret liked him instantly. He reminded her of someone who didn't lie. Probably an old pipe burst, he said, kneeling beside the boiler room entrance. Might be in the lower crawl space. Mind if I go down to the basement? She hesitated. It's locked. You have the key. No, Daniel has it. Todd looked up at her, brow furrowing just slightly. Should I come back later? No, she said, surprising herself. Break the lock. He blinked. You sure? She nodded. Her fingers trembled. Yes. It took only a minute with his tools. The door creaked open with a deep groan. The air that spilled out hit Margaret like a slap, thick, moldy, and sour, like rotting meat left in a damp fridge. She gagged and stepped back, heart pounding. I'll be quick, Todd said, covering his mouth with a sleeve. He descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. Margaret hovered at the top, fingers gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then a pause a beat too long at Mrs. Green. Todd's voice floated up. Yes, there's something you should see. Her legs carried her before her mind caught up. Each step creaked beneath her weight. She reached the bottom and saw him standing near the far wall. His flashlight beam landed not on a broken pipe, but a wall that looked newer than the rest. Clean wood. Fresh paint, as if it had been constructed recently. There's a room behind this, he said quietly. This isn't original to the foundation. Margaret stared at it, breath frozen. Her voice came out small. Can you open it? He gave her a long look. I think you need to call the police. No, she said firmly. Open it. It took a crowbar and several long, grunting minutes. Wood splintered. Dust choked the air. Behind the false wall was a metal door. Old, rusted, but recently used. The latch was scratched, the hinges oiled. Another lock. This wasn't done by an amateur, Todd muttered. Margaret could barely stand. Her legs were trembling. She felt like she was stepping into a nightmare. Finally, the door groaned open. The smell hit like a wave. She stumbled back, covering her mouth. Inside was something between a bunker and a prison cell. The floor was lined with plastic tarps. The walls were covered in maps, photographs, and scribbled notes. A large table held boxes labeled with strange codes and burner phones. There were vials, needles, and a small freezer in the corner, humming quietly. Beside it, a pair of handcuffs bolted to the wall. It didn't make sense. None of it did. This was something out of a television show, not her home, not her children's doing. Todd slowly backed away. Mrs. Green, I think you need to get out of here. But she couldn't move. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor. Her vision swam. She thought of Elena's sudden need for cash, always borrowing money, always saying she needed it for tuition. She thought of Daniel's long nights out, the strange people who sometimes waited for him in black, tout cars. She thought of the whispers she'd heard through the vents' voices, not always just Daniel and Elena's. Sometimes there were others down here, Her stomach turned. She had believed them, trusted them, loved them so deeply it blinded her. She was a mother, wasn't she? And mothers knew their children, didn't they? When Todd called the police, she didn't argue. She simply sat on the floor in the living room, staring at nothing while the flashing lights lit up the windows. Daniel came home first. His face went white when he saw the patrol car. He didn't even try to deny it. "You weren't supposed to know," was all he said. Elena arrived minutes later, breaking into tears immediately. "It wasn't what it looks like, Mom. Please, let us explain." But Margaret didn't hear them. Her ears were full of the sound of her heartbeat. Her chest felt like it was caving in. She watched as the officers cuffed her children, and led them away. Daniel didn't look back. Elena did, her eyes pleading, as if she were the one betrayed. The officers asked if she needed someone to stay with her. She shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I need to be alone." That night, Margaret walked down to the basement again. She opened the hidden room, now lit by harsh police floodlights. She took in every detail. The photos on the wall weren't random. They were of people, neighbors, delivery drivers, a few former students she had taught, targets, clients. Victims. Her hand brushed against a box, flipping the lid. Inside were IDs, dozens of them, fake and real. Some with Daniel's face, some with Elena's, some with strangers. She found a small journal tucked in a drawer. Elena's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. They had been running something dangerous, criminal. Human trafficking, espionage, blackmail. It wasn't clear yet. But it was organized, funded, and had been going on for years right under her nose. A single sentence scrawled in the back made her blood freeze. "She'll never know. Mom's too soft, too blind." Margaret closed the book slowly. The tears didn't come, not yet. Instead, something else began to bloom in her chest, cold, slow, and sharp. Not hatred, not grief, something worse. Purpose. She had been blind, but not anymore. And the next time her children looked into her eyes, they wouldn't see softness. They'd see the woman they had forgotten existed. The house was silent, too silent. Margaret sat in the kitchen hours after the police left, staring at the cooling mug of tea in front of her. She hadn't taken a sip. The world around her seemed dimmed, dulled by the weight of what she had seen, what she now knew. Her home, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become something else, a facade, a mask stretched over something rotten. She thought the betrayal would break her, but it didn't. It just hardened her. The next morning, detectives arrived. They asked polite, rehearsed questions. How long had the children lived here? Did she know of any suspicious behavior? Had she ever been in the basement before? She answered everything truthfully. Her voice stayed calm. Even when they showed her photos, blurry security footage, flagged documents, names connected to larger criminal investigations, she didn't flinch. The word operation kept being used, an organized, localized ring, using the basement as a safe house, storage unit, and communication hub. Cryptic messages, burner phones, fake identities. She felt like she was listening to a news broadcast about someone else's children. Not hers, but it was Daniel. It was Elena, her babies, the ones she had nursed through fevers, taught to tie their shoes. Held after heartbreak, how long had they been lying? Later that evening, Margaret asked to see them. The officers were hesitant, emotional stress, legal limitations, but finally relented, under supervision in separate rooms. She saw Daniel first. He was calm, even behind the glass, older than his years now. The boyish charm had vanished, replaced by something colder. "Calculated, you know I loved Dad," he said quietly, "but after he died, we had to figure things out. We didn't have options, Mom. You don't understand what it's like out there." She didn't reply. "Just watched him. I kept you safe. You never even knew. That's how good we were." He almost looked proud. Margaret's voice was a whisper. "You ran a criminal ring under my house." His smile faded. "You used my home." She continued. "You used me, you stole from people, trapped them, used them like products. What did you do to them, Daniel? Tell me." Silence. Then calmly, "You wouldn't understand." And he was right, she didn't. She stood up. "I don't even know who you are." His parting words chilled her. "You will, Mom. One day you'll see why we did it." Elena was different. She was crying before Margaret entered. Her hands shook. She looked younger, smaller, like the child Margaret remembered, all freckles and wide eyes. "I didn't want to," she whispered, "I swear. Daniel said it was just fake IDs at first, just money stuff, then it grew. He said we couldn't stop." Margaret leaned in. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I was scared. He said if we stopped, people would come for us, that they'd hurt you." Tears ran down her cheeks. "But we kept making money, so much of it. I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to stop." Margaret sat silently for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Alina's hand, not to comfort her, but to feel if the girl she had raised was still in there. "I would have done anything for you," she said, voice trembling. "I would have gone to war for you. You had me and you chose this. I'm sorry," Alina sobbed. "I'm so sorry." Margaret slowly pulled her hand away. "You will be." The investigation dragged on. More homes were raided. Names leaked, apparently. Daniel was part of a larger network, one that dealt in identity fraud, digital blackmail, and possibly even human trafficking. They hadn't confirmed that yet, but Margaret had seen the handcuffs, the bloodstains. She had read the journal. She had her suspicions, more than suspicions. The truth was darker than the authorities were even willing to admit. They weren't seeing what she had seen. Alina's journal was full of disturbing entries. Target met at park, picked up for processing, $12K wired to Daniel, package delivered. Mom asked questions today, had to say it was college stuff, fake IDs destroyed, tracker still active, no one misses runaways, they just vanish. Margaret kept reading, hoping for something redemptive. There was nothing. One night, she wandered back to the basement alone. The room was sealed now, caution tape across the door, the air still stale. She flicked the light on and stared at the remnants of her children's sins. On the table was a photo of a young girl, maybe 16, eyes wide, unsmiling. Her name written in the corner, Jamie C. Margaret had never seen her before. Or so she thought, but something about the eyes felt familiar. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that tasted like guilt. She had seen her delivering groceries months ago, polite, quiet, nervous. Now, the girl was listed in the police report as missing. Her children didn't just commit crimes. They destroyed lives. The betrayal took on new weight. It wasn't just that they lied. They had used Margaret as a shield, as a cover. No one would ever suspect a kind, aging widow of harboring criminals. Her good reputation had become their protection. Her soft voice, her gentle eyes, camouflage for monsters. She looked in the mirror that night and didn't recognize herself either. Then something strange happened. A week later, she received a letter. No return address, just a single piece of paper inside. Typed words, "You don't know everything. Don't trust anyone. More are watching." He wasn't working alone. Below it, a list of names. Some were strangers, some weren't. Her neighbor across the street, the one always traveling for business. The woman at the post office who always knew when packages arrived. Even her doctor's receptionist. It wasn't just her children. It was bigger. Daniel and Alina were soldiers in something larger. Something still breathing. Still watching. And someone knew she was looking. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She didn't cry either. She sat in the dark, reading the list over and over again. The children she raised were gone, but the mother who remained, she was no longer blind, and the world that had used her family, twisted it into something ugly. She would tear it down piece by piece, for Jamie, for the others. And for the woman she used to be. Autumn leaves blew across the porch as Margaret sat alone in her rocking chair, a blanket over her knees and a storm inside her chest. It had been 2 months since the arrests, since the basement was sealed, since the world had tilted, and the children she once swore she knew were unmasked as strangers. Daniel and Alina were being held in separate facilities now, awaiting federal charges. The lawyers had started calling. Some tried to paint the children as victims. Others offered backdoor deals, hoping she'd stay quiet. But Margaret wasn't quiet anymore. She was watching now, and more than that, she was planning. It started with the letter. That single warning had opened a deeper rabbit hole. Margaret didn't trust the police with it, not yet. There were names on that list, familiar ones, faces she had spoken to, trusted for years. She needed answers. And she needed them quietly. So she started pretending. Pretending to be the same Margaret Green everyone had always known, the kind widow who brought cookies to church bake sales, who sent thank you notes in neat handwriting, who waved at neighbors and asked about their grandkids. But beneath the softness, something had shifted. She bought a burner phone. She reactivated an old email her husband once used, one no one else knew about. She taught herself to trace digital breadcrumbs, login locations, metadata, old forum posts from encrypted groups. And she found things the police hadn't yet. She discovered that Daniel and Alina's operation was just one cell in a much wider network. They were facilitators, not leaders. Their house had been a node, a drop point, a signal hub. The real rot. It ran through people with power, local officials, delivery drivers, property managers, people who moved in shadows and back doors, hiding behind their titles and uniforms. Margaret made a spreadsheet. She printed photographs. She mapped movements, watched for patterns, and she began to strike quietly, smartly. Her first move was subtle. She called the post office and asked for a specific package to be rerouted. Just a simple mistake, she said, but the package never arrived. It was intercepted. Inside, $30 0. $0 in prepaid debit cards wrapped in children's clothing. Police never connected it back to her, but someone in the network felt the blow. Margaret felt the first ripple. A message was posted on a hidden forum 2 days later. Greenhouse compromised, changing routes. She smiled when she read that. Greenhouse, a code word. Her home had a name in their system, a nickname, and now they thought it was burned. But Margaret wasn't done. Her second strike was bolder. She sent a care package to Daniel. Inside, a letter written in the code he once used in his journals. The message was simple. I know who gave you the names. I know who took the girl. I'll bring it all down. Watch. He didn't respond. But 3 days later, Margaret was followed home by a black car. She noticed it in the mirror, unmarked. Windows tinted, she didn't flinch. She cooked dinner as usual, set the table, sat at the head where James used to sit. And when the doorbell rang, she didn't answer it. They rang twice. Then they left. Her third strike wasn't a message. It was a warning. She mailed a package to one of the names on the list. Gerald Whitman, a former city councilman who had quietly resigned after a scandal. Inside the box was a single photograph of him in 2008, standing in front of a boarded-up motel with Daniel and another unknown man. And a note, smile, the girl in this photo never made it home. She never heard back from him, but he left town a week later. His name disappeared from every online listing. Phone number dead, vanished, another ripple, another crack in the network. Margaret moved like a ghost. No one suspected the grieving mother. She planted whispers in anonymous tip lines, triggered audits, uploaded evidence to whistleblower blogs, used AI voice generators to mimic old voicemails and rattle nerves. Every person on that list, she gave them a piece of their past back, not through revenge that brought her satisfaction, but justice that brought their shame. But it wasn't enough. She hadn't spoken to Alina since the first visit, but she couldn't forget her daughter's sobs. The fear in her eyes, the journal entries. One entry returned to Margaret every night. I kept a key, just in case Mom ever found out. I wanted her to have a way out. It had been taped to the back of the journal, a small metal key, rusted but intact. Margaret never figured out what it opened. Until one night she did, buried in a shoebox in the attic, inside one of Daniel's old high school trophies. She found a locked USB drive. The key didn't fit the drive itself, but it fit the box it was hidden in. The drive was disguised to look like a photo frame. When she opened it on a public library computer, she found video files, hundreds of them, footage of conversations, transactions, confessions, even a recording of someone, not Daniel, taking credit for disposing of the girl in the green hoodie. Jamie C. Alina hadn't been lying completely. She had collected this. She had feared it. Margaret sent the drive to a trusted journalist with no return address. The story exploded. National coverage, federal task forces, arrests, indictments. Margaret watched it all from her living room with the curtains drawn. The house was quieter now, no pipes groaning, no whispers through the vents, just the creaking of the wind outside, and the slow healing of a heart broken, but not beaten. A month later, she received a letter in a childish, familiar hand. From Alina, Mom, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I know what you did. We saw the news. I know it was you, thank you, not for saving me, for saving them, for saving those people. I wish I could be someone you're proud of again. I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you might see me again. Love, always, Alina. Margaret folded the letter and tucked it into her coat pocket. She didn't cry, but she did smile softly, painfully, not because she forgave, not yet, but because she had survived. And because the children who thought she was weak, too soft, too blind, had underestimated the oldest truth of all, you don't betray a mother. Not without consequences.